Andrea, it actually wasn't a surprise announcement. We've all been anticipating it for days, but it didn't really shake up the world. As Vaughn noted, there were a lot of absences. It was a very familiar speech with Trump repeating many of the lines he's been saying year over year on the campaign trail, even lines he had back 7 years ago when he first came down the escalator at Trump Tower to announce his 2016 campaign. And you're smart to point out that New York Post headline. It's been remarkable how antagonistic the whole Murdoch media empire has been the last few days to the idea of another Trump campaign. We've seen Fox News have some, pretty mixed commentary about Trump. They even cut away from his speech live last night. The Wall Street Journal editorial board has been quite negative about Trump, and I think it symbolizes to some degree the difficulty he's going to have in sort of instantly uniting the Republican Party behind him. He, of course, is the leader of the party. He's the most popular Republican at the moment, but he does not have unified control over Republican officials or Republican voters the way he did when he was president, and he's going to have to rebuild that if he wants to be the nominee and standard bearer again.
David Jolly, it's hard to overstate the importance of the amplification that he received in his previous campaigns from Fox News, from the Murdoch papers, from the support of these media organs.
Yeah, Andrea, Fox News holds enormous power in this race. I mean, as Philip said, they cut away from the speech last night, but the commentary was all about how the OG, the original, is back. And it was actually praising Donald Trump. And it was a demonstration of the fact that Fox News gets to set the narrative for much of Trump's followers and voters. And if they do fully turn on Trump and try to anoint DeSantis, that makes this a very hard environment for Donald Trump. I think what you saw last night was the reality of timing for the former president. He needed to get in first to set the field because all of these other potential candidates, the one thing they have not done, but you're starting to see, is directly challenge the former president. DeSantis has not, Pence has not, Pompeo has not. If Trump had waited, one of those potential candidates would have gotten to set the field, and then Donald Trump would have entered after them. This way, it is Trump's field, and when somebody enters it, now he will have the opportunity to hit back on him.
And, of course, the party didn't want him to get into this before Georgia because he has already proved, by the way voters reacted in the midterms, that he is not a plus right now to, in the midterm elections. He was a negative, and it was a bad loss for so many of those MAGA candidates, and they still want to win Georgia. Donna, President Biden has, of course, not launched his reelection campaign. Anticipated. He says he's made a decision, and certainly been leaning towards it. But he tweeted on his personal account last night, while Donald Trump was speaking, that Trump failed America with a video ticking off January 6th and other Trump-era scandals. So Democrats are going to try to remind people of all of the baggage that Donald Trump has.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. And frankly, to President Biden's credit, what he needs to do is to continue to play the role that he's playing now on the world stage in front of all of us, continue to do the business of being president. He can take his time making a decision about entering the 2024 race. In the meanwhile, the victim from Florida gets to, play in Republican Party politics while they eat and feed on their young. I mean, I do think that the former President Trump, while he isn't consolidating, obviously, all of the political apparatus within the Republican Party, these elections that were held were very close races, which means that he does still have some sway of a significant part of that base. And until one of those other candidates or someone steps in and decides to take that away and directly go at the former president, it's hard to see how he doesn't consolidate what he needs to secure a nomination. But we're a long way from that. And the job of Democrats is just stay on message, keep doing the job, and demonstrate the former president's continued failure.
Phil Rucker, let's talk about Ron DeSantis, because Donald Trump was announcing in Florida. The sitting governor, of course, was not there. But Ron DeSantis, I think we have that comment that he made recently when asked to compare himself to Donald Trump. Let's watch.
When you're leading, when you're getting things done, yeah, you take incoming fire. That's just the nature of it. At the end of the day, I would just tell people to go check out the scoreboard from last Tuesday night.
So that's not very subtle, pointing out that he was the big winner Tuesday night, and arguably Donald Trump was the big loser.
Yeah, he was, Andrea. And while Trump is launching his presidential campaign, what we've seen Ron DeSantis do the last couple of days is celebrate that win, cultivate relationships with some of the big donors, with fellow Republican governors, and focus on what he's doing in Florida for a second term. He knows that he doesn't need to jump into this presidential race tomorrow. He can take a breath. He can focus on the record he has in Florida, which proved so popular with Republican voters last week in the election, and how he might translate that into a national vision and into a campaign that could take on Trump.